Hi there, I'm Christine, and this is the Canadian Constitution Foundation's Freedom Update. Today is November 15th, and I'm going to give you a quick summary of what happened at today's hearing in the Public Order Emergency Commission, also known as the Rouleau Commission. This is the legally required inquiry into the federal government's first ever invocation of the Emergencies Act, which was done in response to the 2022 Freedom Convoy. The Commission is examining and assessing the government's decision to declare an emergency. In this video, I'm going to give you a quick summary of some of the things that stood out to me in these historic hearings today. And today there were two witnesses, Duheme, the Deputy Commissioner of the RCMP, and Brenda, Lucki, the Commissioner of the RCMP. These were two very important witnesses, and my organization, the Canadian Constitution Foundation, cross-examined them. I'm going to leave a link down below and up there to our cross-examination video so you can check that out on your own. I'd also like to briefly mention some of the evidence from yesterday from two senior federal public safety bureaucrats who testified. I can't wait to tell you all about it. So today the Rouleau Commission heard from two witnesses, Brenda, Lucki, and Duheme from the RCMP. But before getting into what happened, just a few things. First, as you can probably hear from my voice, I'm a little bit sick. That's why I haven't done a summary video in a little while. I lost my voice a few weeks ago, and then I got it back, and then I lost it again. So it's still not great, as you can hear. Second, please remember that this is just my summary of some of the key parts of the testimony that stood out to me. It's not my opinion of the testimony unless I tell you it's my opinion. It's also just my best recollection of the testimony. If you want every single detail, the full videos are all posted on the Commission website. Okay, let's get to the details of today's testimony from RCMP Commissioner Lucki and Deputy Commissioner Duheme. The first thing that stood out to me was a series of questions related to the sequence of the order of operations for the Ottawa Police requesting help from other police services. Commissioner Lucki testified that it was her understanding that the Police Services Act required the Ottawa Police to first go to the OPP to seek assistance, and then to exhaust that resource, then to go to other local police forces before they could go to the RCMP. This was her understanding of that legislation based on how it was explained to her by OPP Commissioner Geyn. She said that she herself didn't know the nuances of the Ontario Police Services Act because the RCMP doesn't fall under it. She said that her experience was actually that once asked for assistance by another police force, the RCMP just provided those resources directly. They didn't go through the OPP. But when the Ottawa Police requested a very large number of officers, Commissioner Geyn from the OPP told Commissioner Lucki that it was required for the Ottawa Police to go to the OPP first and then to other jurisdictions. Now, we actually don't, at CCF, we do not agree that this is what that legislation requires. And Lucki herself said that she does not know the nuances of the Ontario Police Services Act. She was just going on what Geyn told her. Now, we actually cross-examined a number of other witnesses about this exact issue. We cross-examined federal safety, public safety witnesses about this issue yesterday. We put the legislation to them, and it's nowhere in the legislation that it's required for the Ottawa Police or for a local police force to go to the OPP first before they can request help from the RCMP. So we do not agree. In our opinion, that is legally incorrect. Commissioner Lucki also testified that she didn't know that the Ottawa Police were looking for such a large number of officers, 1,800, until she saw a letter from Ottawa Mayor Jim Watson to the federal and provincial governments. Commissioner Lucki testified that the RCMP was caught off guard by this request, and she also testified that the letter from Mayor Watson didn't have any specific information about the request, such as how long those offices would be needed for or what exactly they would be doing. Commissioner Lucki also testified that usually such requests for assistance are made from one police service to another and not through politicians. And the documents in the party database that have been publicly disclosed also show that Commissioner Lucki told Ottawa Police Chief Slowly that it is not helpful for the mayor to be the one making resource requests. Another thing that stood out to me was a line of questioning about the development of the operational plan leading up to the invocation of the Emergencies Act. By February 11th, Commissioner Lucki testified that the RCMP had been briefed on an operational plan, and that plan used existing common law police powers. There was also some talk of powers under Ontario emergencies legislation, but the Emergencies Act, the Federal Emergencies Act, was not taken into account in that planning. The plan was drawn up without reliance on powers under the Emergencies Act, although Lucki said that they did talk about that possibility of the legislation a little bit later on. She also testified that once that operational plan had been developed, there was no discussion at that time about deficiencies in the plan due to gaps in powers or authorities. On February 13th, Commissioner Lucki briefed Cabinet on that plan. Now remember, this is important because the Emergencies Act was invoked the next day on February 14th. So by February 13th, Cabinet knew that there was an integrated command with an operational plan. Now the other thing that's really important is this widely reported on note from Lucki where she outlines that they had not exhausted all available tools under existing legislation. Now Lucki said this to Cabinet and to the Incident Response Group. So this is really important. By February 13th, Cabinet knew that there was an integrated command with an operational plan and that they had not exhausted all legal tools. This is very relevant because the Emergencies Act is a tool of last resort. It can only be used if other legal tools are not available. And if on the 13th, Cabinet knew that there was a plan and that they hadn't exhausted legal tools, then in my opinion, it was completely improper for them to invoke the Emergencies Act. Indeed, in my opinion, in our opinion, it was illegal because the threshold then was not met. Commissioner Lucki was also asked about hindsight and the use of the Emergencies Act in hindsight. And she did testify that the powers and the authorities under the Emergencies Act was useful under the operational plan. But remember, useful is not the same thing as necessary. And Lucki has testified that there was no gap in authorities or powers in the operational plan that they developed and that they hadn't exhausted legal tools. So the fact that police found having more power was useful, in my opinion, that's not super meaningful. In my opinion, it's a pretty safe bet the police will almost always find it useful to have more powers and authorities. Lucki and Duheme were also questioned about some of the specific powers under the emergencies orders, which were enacted once the Emergencies Act had been invoked. Duheme had been asked about the power to create exclusion zones under the emergencies order, but he said that they actually used existing authorities, common law policing powers, to put up the perimeter around the protests. They did not actually use the powers under the Emergencies Act to achieve that. Lucki was also asked about the powers under the Emergencies Act relating to tow trucks. She was asked if she ever exercised that power in Ontario, and she said no, she delegated it to OPP Commissioner Carrick. To the extent that she said the tow truck power in the Emergencies Act was used, it would have been used as delegated to the OPP. She was asked if she understood that the OPP actually already had some tow trucks obtained. She said she doesn't know anything about tow trucks, but she wasn't even sure, if the OPP would need that power or not, but she did assume that they would. She was aware also that the Emergencies Act, the tow truck related powers, created an obligation to compensate tow truck drivers for their work, and that the bill for that would come to the RCMP. And indeed, it did go to the RCMP. She said it was quite a big bill. She knew that giving the OPP that power would result in the costs being charged back to the federal government. But she said that if the OPP had the ability to get tow trucks on their own, the federal government wouldn't be paying for it. She testified that she didn't know about the process whereby tow trucks would choose to go the route of going through the federal power and charging back to the feds rather than the province. But she said that she had no information contradicting a document summary from an OPP officer that said that the emergency order was not used to compel Ottawa tow trucks, but rather to compensate them. She did not know about this. But again, this is all really relevant to the question of whether or not that power was actually necessary. If the OPP had the trucks, they already had them all lined up. that the power under the Emergencies Act that was used was actually related more to financial compensation, which again, actually you could have done, the government could have done under Ontario provincial powers. On cross-examination, counsel for the protesters questioned Commissioner Luckie about the role of political interference, including issues related to the SNC-Lavalin scandal and the Nova Scotia mass killing inquiry, including allegations arising out of that related to the release of information on firearms by the RCMP following that mass shooting. There's quite the scandal going on about this involving Commissioner Luckie herself. Basically, the counsel for the protesters was trying to get at the issue of alleged political interference in police operations by bringing up these other cases of alleged political direction or pressure. In my opinion, though, I think that line of question might not have been especially helpful to the commission, given that at the end of the counsel for the protesters cross-examination, Commissioner Rouleau said that he found that the questions related to the Nova Scotia inquiry were not exactly relevant. Commissioner Luckie was also cross-examined by a lawyer for the OPP. She agreed that at no point did she ask the federal government to invoke the Emergencies Act, but she did agree, as she had stated earlier, that the tools under the Emergencies Act were useful. But again, remember, useful is not the threshold here. She was asked whether she felt that the government had already decided to invoke the Emergencies Act before the February 13th cabinet meeting. She said she doesn't know, but that the RCMP had prepared advice on what new powers might be useful if they did invoke the Emergencies Act. We also cross-examined Commissioner Luckie. I won't summarize how that cross-examination went here. I have a whole separate video about it, which I have linked to in the description below, so you can check that out. I want to turn briefly now to an exchange from yesterday that's really important and also extremely relevant. Yesterday, the commission heard from two senior bureaucrats from the Federal Department of Public Safety. They heard from Rob Stewart, the Deputy Minister for Public Safety, and from Dominic Rochon, the Senior Assistant Deputy Minister for National Security and Cybersecurity. Yesterday, we learned that the CSIS director had told Cabinet the day before the Emergencies Act was invoked that the protests did not reach the threat level that the Act relies on, that the CSIS Act relies on. To invoke the Emergencies Act, the threat must be a threat to the security of Canada as it's defined in the CSIS Act. That includes espionage or sabotage of Canada's interests, foreign influence activities, threats of use of serious violence to achieve a political, religious, or ideological objective, or the violent overthrow of the government. According to the CSIS director's interview summary, the CSIS director told the inquiry lawyers that he felt an obligation to clearly convey the service's position, CSIS's position, that there did not exist a threat to the security of Canada as defined under the CSIS Act. He also told the inquiry lawyers that at no point did the protests constitute such a threat. The CSIS director's comments were put to the witness, Rob Stewart, and Mr. Stewart testified that CSIS's assessment was clear to him and he believed it was also clear to Cabinet. Now, in my opinion, this creates a really big problem for the government. If CSIS didn't think that there was a national security threat, why did Cabinet? What other evidence did Cabinet rely on to make the decision to invoke the Emergencies Act, if they relied on anything at all? There's nothing that we've seen so far that would justify it. The only evidence that the government has given is one conclusory statement that there was an emergency. This is not good enough, especially when CSIS, who is actually tasked with interpreting the legislation that defines national security threat, well, when they think that there was no such threat. Okay, that's all for today. I'm going to give my voice a break, but you can stay up to date by subscribing to this channel or by subscribing to our email freedom updates at the ccf.ca/freedom updates. I also want to thank all of you who have been helping us to participate in this inquiry by donating to support our legal fees, which are quite expensive in this case. So if you want to continue to support our work, you can make a tax-deductible charitable donation at the ccf.ca/donate. If you can't, no worries at all. Just by watching this video helps us out because our channel is monetized. So thanks for making it this far. Okay, that's all for this update. Thanks for watching, and let's keep fighting for freedom in Canada. Today is November 15th, and I'm going to give you a quick summary